Hello everyone and welcome back to the CDL podcast. This is obviously going to be the post-playoffs pod episode and I am super excited to get into this. But before we get started, please be sure to subscribe to the channel if you enjoy. Drop a sub. We're on the road to 200 subscribers, something I never thought I'd say. But yeah, we're on the road to that, so drop a sub if you do enjoy this video or you've enjoyed other videos on the channel and you still aren't. I'd appreciate it if you do that. Then also drop a like if you enjoyed this video, and as always, comment your thoughts down below. Pause the video if you're 10 minutes in and all of a sudden you want to comment on something, comment that, and then maybe pause again later and comment on something else. Obviously, I appreciate any comments you guys do. My favorite part of the videos is to continue to have a dialogue with you guys in the comments, and a lot of you I talk to on Twitter and stuff too, and that's just my favorite part about doing this. So please continue to drop your comments down below and your thoughts on anything in general, even if it's a question about my experience in Call of Duty, something completely unrelated to COD, anything. I'd just love to talk to you guys about it. But yeah, this is going to be the post-playoffs episode, obviously talking about everything that happened from losers round 1 all the way up until our top 4 here, which obviously hasn't happened yet. But yeah, we're going to get into that. And before we get into kind of the analysis of each team like we normally do and a little bit of the analysis of the bracket, we're just going to offer some quick reactions to some news in the CDL, just in Call of Duty in general, some things that have been happening. There is some pretty big developments about an hour before I started recording this. It wasn't planned to be in here because I didn't know it was a thing. And then all of a sudden some news came out about it, so we've definitely got to talk about it. But the first thing, before we get that exciting news, we'll give the downer news first, so that way we can get a little more hyped after. It looks like I'm seeing all over Twitter from like Scraps and a bunch of people that maybe the MP5 has been adjusted in some way. I saw some people saying it seems like it has a lot more recoil. The iron sights seem different. It seems more like zoomed in or zoomed out or something. And that is just like unacceptable from IW. Again, IW, shocker, continues to disappoint. Infinity Ward, worst COD developer in my opinion. I mean, Sledgehammer isn't the greatest either, but my God, I prefer World War II and IW over this game, hands down. Infinity Ward continues to disappoint. They didn't even give us a ranked play this year in a year that they started a franchise league. Unbelievable, unacceptable. I rant about IW a lot. You guys know I can't stand them. I mean, they have never had a ranked play in their game. None of the Modern Warfares, which is a little bit acceptable because we didn't really have a ranked play until Black Ops 2. So the Modern Warfares kind of get a little bit of a pass. And then in Ghosts, they didn't put one in. There was no real ranked play. Then the following title for them, IW, they didn't really put one in. And now this year in Modern Warfare, they still haven't put another ranked playlist in. How can you not put a ranked playlist in a game where you've made like a $300 million franchise league and you're investing a bunch of money in it? It's just, at this point, it's just beating a dead horse and continue to talk about it. It's just the dumbest thing ever. But also, they're paying so much for this league and so much in ads. And I mean, if it fails, they're going to lose a lot of money on it. So why are you changing the gun that's used in it? You couldn't wait 4 more days until after it's done to adjust the MP5. I really hope that it's not that much worse, and because it would really suck to have a meta shift and like everybody starts using the MP7 this weekend or something, because come on, we want consistent results from last weekend. We don't want it to be somebody is quicker to adjusting to new metas and that's the reason they win. We want consistent results from the meta that's been in place for months. I mean, come on. That was just horrible news when I saw that. So I hope either it gets reversed or hopefully people are overreacting and it's really not that bad and it doesn't change much. Because I would hate for somebody to get kind of a fluke win because they're faster to learn the MP7 than others, or whatever new gun would be used, or if there's RAMs, if teams haven't practiced with the RAM. I do like when COD teams have to adjust to new things, but I hate when it's like a week before champs they have to adjust to it. Like middle of the year, I like when they have to adjust to a new meta. It makes it more fun and fresh, but not 4 days before the Final Four play. And then next, off that downer topic, no more downer this entire video. Next, there's tons of Cold War news that was released like 30 minutes to an hour before I'm recording this podcast. Obviously, it'll be a little longer once I'm done recording and get it all uploaded and everything. But at the time of this recording, about half an hour ago, I saw a Salvation's Elite video. If you guys don't know him, go check him out. He kind of does what I do, but he's obviously much more popular. And yeah, he basically makes like CDL videos, competitive COD videos. He's kind of in the same space that we are here on this channel. So good at what he does. So go check him out if you haven't. Basically, I'm outrageously excited to share with you boys some of the stuff he said, and you wouldn't believe how excited I am about this. It sounds like a COD that's right up my alley based on a lot of things that he said. So shout out to him, Salvation's Elite. In his video, some of the highlights, I'm obviously not going to go over his entire video. If you want to check it out, just look up his channel. It's his most recent upload. But some of the highlights of what he said in his video were 150 health is back in Cold War. Now, this isn't technically 100% confirmed, but apparently I also saw the CDL Intel page, who's basically right on all leaks he does. He also said that this source is pretty damn reliable. He's pretty sure that this information is accurate. So that's two pretty reliable sources in the community saying that they got it from a reliable source. So I'm going to tend to believe that this is probably mostly true or very close to true. But anyways, what he said was 150 health is back, but no stim shot. Stim shot is like a tactical, like a stun or anything that you could use, but it's not like actually built into the system where it doesn't sound like you have to have it, is what I'm trying to say, like you did in BO4. Like if you didn't use stim, you were pretty much screwed. It doesn't sound like you have to use stim in this. It's like a normal regen. Like you will still regen health, just like in BO4 you didn't regen at all, unless you use some form of healing. It sounds like healing is auto, which is, it's good. I kind of did enjoy stim for certain situations, but I know most of the competitive community enjoys like the normal health regen that's been in every other COD. But the time to kill is apparently slightly faster than BO4. So 150 health is back, but you'll kill somewhere in between, like probably just slightly more than a normal COD. So the time to kill will be way longer than Modern Warfare, thank God. Modern Warfare's time to kill is so fast that you can't even get in gunfights. So it'll be like BO4 time to kill, but maybe a little bit toned down. That sounds perfect to me. And then apparently the movement in the game surprised me a little bit. They said in the video, Salvation's Elite said that it's pretty similar to like a BO4 style movement in a way, but it doesn't have, as of right now, like a more OP slide cancel type mechanic, which sounds, I mean, pretty good because the slide cancel was pretty broken in that game. So it sounds like the BO4 movement system is basically back with not as much slide canceling, which shocks me because the game is apparently set in like the 1980s, so I'm kind of surprised they went with the slide. The slides have usually been in more of the futuristic advanced games, and they usually do like dolphin dives in the older games or whatever, but I'm glad that slide's back. I kind of prefer it. And then it sounds like score streaks are back, but they might be modified. I don't really want to talk too much on how they're modified because it seemed complicated and I don't want to get that wrong. Dead silence is a perk, thank God. Dead silence should have been a perk this entire year, but it never was. But apparently, I think in an earlier build of the game it wasn't, but they heard feedback from the community and how bad they wanted dead silence as a perk. So Vonderhaar, being the GOAT that he is, must have changed that and made dead silence a perk rather than like a field upgrade. Although it did sound like field upgrades were back in some capacity, and I don't know too much about those, so I don't want to touch on those, but it sounded like in some capacity they were back. 3-lane maps sounded to be back, although he seemed a little concerned that they were a little big. It also sounded like ground war was back. There are no specialists. Pick 10 seems to be back, so Pick 10 is my favorite class system. I'm so glad that's back. And then apparently the confirmed ARs that are in the game is like an AK-47, which there's like a variation of the AK-47 in like every game pretty much, so no shock that that's back. And then also interestingly enough, the M16 is back, which this game is a direct sequel to Black Ops 1, so that's not surprising, but maybe we'll see the M16 as a competitive gun, maybe a burst gun. I think the last time a burst gun was like actually in the meta was the Black Ops 3 Mate. I don't think there was one in IW, World War II, BO4, or this year. Yeah, there was no burst guns, so this will be the first time, maybe. Obviously, it's way too early to tell, but it could possibly be the first time that a burst gun is back in the meta since BO3. And then the confirmed subs are some gun. I don't really remember the name of it, but he said it was kind of like an Uzi, and then there's also an MP5. I really hope it's nothing like this year's MP5, and then an AK-74U, which also was a really good gun in Black Ops 1. So yeah, if you can't tell this, I'm really amped about this. I started talking pretty fast. If I start talking pretty fast about something, you know that's how I'm passionate and amped about it. But I love this news. I'm super excited about it. So I really, really hope that all this actually pans out to be true, and because if all that pans out to be true, I think we're looking at a pretty good game, at least competitively. But yeah, that's really the only news I wanted to dive into because we have a lot of teams to go over. Obviously, all the teams played this weekend rather than just 8 like normal. So I wanted to get into kind of how the teams did this weekend. And also, I kind of wanted to mention before we get into this, if you didn't check out my prediction video, I didn't get exactly right how it happened or the earlier matches perfectly right, but I did get the Final Four correct, which I'm pretty proud of. I don't think many people actually picked London because they weren't obviously like a favorite. A lot of people were picking like Florida or Toronto or New York to make it to the Final Four, but I actually did pick Atlanta, Dallas, Chicago, and London, so I'm pretty proud of that. I think I'm probably in a pretty small minority of percentage of people that actually picked London to make the Final Four. So that's pretty cool, I think. To be able to get your Final Four right at Champs is pretty impressive. Not many people probably do it, especially with how good Florida and New York had looked recently. A lot of people, I think, picked them over London to be that fourth team with Chicago, Atlanta, and Dallas. But yeah, now I'm probably going to pull up the COD Gamepedia bracket, because it doesn't seem like the CDL posted a final bracket for what happened. So I'll pull up the COD Gamepedia graphic that shows the kind of the whole bracket, so you guys can kind of have a reminder of what happened as I talk about the teams. And we'll quickly touch on their weekends. Obviously, the better they did, we'll probably talk about them a little more, because if you were 3-0'd like Seattle in the first round, there's not much to talk about, especially since their year is over. But we're probably going to go from bottom to top. We'll probably go from the teams that finished last up to the teams that finished top 4 at the end. So yeah, here's the bracket. First, the Surge. There's not a whole lot to say. Octane obviously played super well. Again, no shocker. He played super well like he always does. He had a 1.3. I think he had like a 1.29, 1.3 basically. Apathy actually played super well. He had like a 1.06. Slack didn't play horrible. Proto was pretty bad. And Pander was typical Pander. He was pretty average. And they were just garbage. They got 3-0'd by Paris. I heard Proto was getting like hit on and off kind of during the match, which is super unfortunate. We'll kind of talk about that a little bit with the teams that it happened to. But I'm just glad I don't have to talk about Seattle anymore and have to get frustrated with them, because once again, they're a super veteran-filled team with players that are champions. That seems like they should have been able to at least win some series and for God's sakes, it feels like all year, at least Seattle should have been able to be like a top 8 team that would have made a couple semifinals here and there, but they like never even made a semifinal. They were so bad all year. They did make that one semifinal where they lost to Atlanta. I do remember that, but I think that's like the only one they made all year. They were like the most disappointing team of the year. I'm glad we're done talking about them. Next is the LA Gorillas, the other team that finished that in that 11/12th spot. Once again, Aqua actually went crazy in the one series they played. He dropped like a 1.55 or something like that. Like, it was insane what he dropped. He played so well. But they should have been smoked. I mean, let's be honest. Kenny got booted in, I think it was the map 2. I think he got booted in the search maybe, and he for sure got booted in the map 4 hardpoint. And they still couldn't beat him. I mean, Kenny got booted offline in 2 of the 4 maps that he played, and they still lost the series. Obviously, Dashy subbed in that map 5 and actually did super well with the sniper and stuff. But LA Gorillas, they just honestly sucked. They couldn't even beat a team that was having one of their players leg out in half the maps. I'm glad we're also done talking about them. They were just super disappointing all year. And then Paris was one of the teams that finished 9/10th. They actually that's the bottom placing that was in the money. And they actually really impressed me. I don't want to talk too negative about them, because all of their players actually played pretty well on the weekend, and they were able to beat a team that, I mean, most people were saying, oh, Seattle's going to make a run at champs finally. They have these experienced players, and they have an easy match. They're going to beat Paris, and Paris came out, punched them in the mouth, and won 3-0. And I'm one of the people that picked Seattle to win 3-1, so I'm actually kind of glad that Paris proved me wrong, because Seattle didn't really deserve to be in the money after how bad they had played all year. Paris actually had some runs. They made it to a final. They looked good on LAN early in the year. They went 2-0 at the first event in Minnesota. They had actually showed some potential, so I'm kind of glad they were able to beat Seattle. Then they obviously fell to a hot Ravens team that had the fire after losing in that kind of BS way with 0 getting hit off in the first round. They played London close in some maps, but honestly, nothing to be ashamed about for Paris. Honestly, everybody pinned them as the worst team in the league. They were going to be number 12. They were just garbage, everybody said. I was one of those people that said, they're going to be bad, which obviously they weren't super good in the year. They finished 9/10th, which, I mean, that's obviously not a super great placing, but honestly, for them, it's something to be proud of. Everybody said you were the worst team. You're going to finish dead last. You suck. They didn't make any roster changes. They stuck it out. They made a run and finished second at one tournament. They went 2-0 on LAN at Minnesota. They had some runs where they'd win a couple series here and there, and then they were able to get in the money. So honestly, I think Paris should be pretty proud of where they finished, considering everybody was just throwing them in the garbage at the beginning of the year. Kind of the opposite story here for this next team that also finished 9/10th. The Rocker were just so disappointed again. They had a chance to win like every single map, and they blew like pretty much every single map. And every hardpoint, they probably could have won it, and they found a way to just throw it away. They just couldn't close out a map. They should have honestly probably won some of their series. They could have easily won their first series against New York if they went to throwing away maps. And I saw a thing that they haven't won a series since like May. It's like 12 straight series or something that they've lost. Assault was the only positive KD on the team. And Exceed actually didn't really play that bad. He actually had some pretty good maps. I just kind of feel bad that their season ended the way it did. But I'm honestly just glad to be done talking about them. They started so well. They looked like they were possibly a top 4, top 3 team. We've said it a million times. Then they started to fall off. I'm just glad to be done talking about them because their story's kind of sad on the year. They started so well, and then they ended up being like, honestly, over the last, since like May until champs, they honestly might have been the worst team in the league. They didn't win a series in that like 3-month span. Now kind of starting to get to some more disappointing teams here. Team that finished like 7th/8th. That'd be New York. A super disappointing finish for them, obviously, because they had hopes to, with the caliber of players in their team, they obviously had hopes to be in the championship weekend in the top 4 and maybe even win it. Some people actually had them as a dark horse team to make the top 4 and win it. But I'm not too shocked with their placement. Obviously, I would think that they'd be a team that would finish at least like 5th/6th or maybe even make the top 4. But I even said in my prediction video coming into this, I wasn't that confident in them. They also did something that I think is important for some Call of Duty fans to understand. I think anybody that's super experienced in the world of competitive Call of Duty understands this. But if we have any like fans that are newer to the league, because the CDL obviously is a franchise league, there might be a lot of new fans. I think looking at their stats and doing a deep dive into their team, as somebody like me who loves to look at the more analytical side of Call of Duty and look at weird stats like kills per 10 minutes or pacing or stuff like that, I like to look as a deep dive. But somebody who's just more of a newer, more casual fan isn't as into it but enjoys it. They like to look at the KDs, and I think this is a perfect example of why people say all the time that KD isn't the most important stat. And I mean, it matters. Obviously, if you're dropping a 0.5 every event, you're probably not a pro caliber player, but it isn't as important as some people seem to make it out in the community. Because I mean, everybody on the New York subliners had a 1.08 or higher, except for Temp, who had a 0.96. Now, normally, if everybody in your team basically has a 1.1 or higher, and then your worst player KD wise has a 0.96, you're probably winning that event in almost any other situation. But despite having this high of a KD, they only beat a Minnesota team who's a shell of themselves. And even a lot of those maps were really close. They could have easily lost to Minnesota. And then they fell to Chicago and London. So now to give them a little bit of a break at the same time, they did lose a map 5 to Chicago and a map 5 to London. So it's not like they were just getting smoked 3-0. Map 5s are one thing that they could have easily gone both ways. And who knows, New York could be in instead of Chicago or London if those map 5s are able to go their way. But honestly, map 5 is probably the reason that they didn't have as good of a year as they should have anyways, because I believe if they just found a way to be better at search, they could have easily been a top 4 team and maybe even been in the top 4 here next weekend. But they've just been so bad. I think in that Chicago series when they lost 3-2, I'm pretty sure they won map 1 and 4. I'm pretty sure that Chicago won both searches, and obviously they won the map 5. But I'm pretty sure Chicago won both searches and the Dom to take that. I don't think Chicago won a hardpoint. And Chicago, everybody was saying, was the best hardpoint team all year, and I think New York took 2 hardpoints off them. So this team proved that KD isn't everything. Disappointing for them to finish 7th/8th, though. They're obviously a team that had high hopes to win the tournament with the caliber of players they had. Their team is filled with 4 champions. Well, I don't know, 3 champions, Temp, who's a super talented player, and then Mac, who's also obviously a super talented player, especially in this game. I believe, though, all year, though, if they could have somehow... I mean, they have players like Zuma's always been pretty good at search. Accuracy's been an okay search player. Attaches obviously came up from the search community. I think Temp's honestly always struggled in search. And then Mac kind of came out of the search community, too. So you'd figure that they could have found a way to be better in search. They just didn't. To me, that's the reason that they finished in this position. I guess I was saying we're not going to be as negative about some of these teams and some of this podcast going on, but man, we go from Minnesota, a super disappointment, to New York, a super disappointment, and then the other team that finished 7th/8th is another super disappointment. It's the Florida Mutineers. Like I said, what a disappointment they were. I said in my bracket prediction video that if you've been watching Call of Duty for a long time, you know that one of the top 4 at a minimum is bound to not make the top 4. In this format, I thought it was maybe the most possible we'd ever see it, since our top 4 teams had buys and stuff. Obviously, at normal champs, when there's 32 teams there, you have to make a run all the way from pools all the way down to the top 4. Usually, maybe only 1 or 2 of the top 4 teams will make it because it's so much more of a gauntlet. So I was obviously expecting at least 2 of them to make it in this because, I mean, Dallas and Atlanta had to win 1 series. So obviously, a lot of our top 4 was going to make it. But I said there's probably a pretty high likelihood that at least one of them doesn't make it because it never goes the way you think it does at champs, or you think it would. But I didn't know Florida would get absolutely smoked, go 1-6 in map count, and not even win a series. Honestly, Awakening, Skies, and Frosty weren't really bad stats-wise. Skies was a little lower than his normal, but he still had like a 1.15. Awakening was around a 1.15, and Frosty was around his typical about like a 1. So they weren't really bad stats-wise. Honestly, Fero wasn't too bad stats-wise either. He had like a 0.98, 0.99, something like that. But that's under his usual like 1.1 plus MVP performance we have, so maybe that could have been slightly what hurt them a little bit. He wasn't at his normal MVP form. And then Havoc was also pretty bad. When I was making up my notes for this Florida team, it's honestly just, I mean, they were, at one point they seemed like they were going to win champs because they were like the best team in the game in the middle of the year. But one interesting note I was thinking of when thinking of Florida that I wanted to touch on was Havoc being kind of bad at champs in a way. I heard Nameless touch on it in one of his podcasts saying, like, I don't really want to put a bad name on a player, but Havoc might just be somebody who can't play at champs. And then I started to think about it in my head, and I don't know if these stats are 100% accurate, so if they're not, I apologize, but I'm pretty sure they are. Off the top of my head, I'm fairly certain that Havoc hasn't won a series at champs since Black Ops 3. I'm pretty sure that in IW, he was with like Naga, Nameless, and one other player, I can't remember who, and I'm pretty sure they didn't, I know for sure they didn't get out of pools, but I'm pretty sure they won like 0-4 in pools or whatever, so I don't think he won a series at IW, and even if he didn't get out of pools at IW at least. And then in World War II, he was on like Gas Gaming or something with Naga and some other players, and they didn't even qualify. I remember they got like reverse swept, because like Kismet was on their team too. I think like Kismet and Naga and Havoc and somebody else were on a team, and they were up 2-0, and Havoc was talking a bunch of crap and stuff. Or not Havoc, Kismet was talking a bunch of crap in that World War II champs qualifier, and then they ended up getting reverse swept. So he didn't win a series at IW, or at least didn't make it out of pools. Then he didn't even qualify for champs in World War II. And then in BO4, he was like on one of the favorites, like a top 3 favorite to win champs on Gen G. They had just come off like back-to-back second places. And then they had like the biggest upset of all time at champs. They didn't even win a series, didn't make it out of pools, finished dead last. And now this year, he's on a team that maybe isn't the absolute favorite, but once again, they're probably one of the top 4 teams that people expect, along with Chicago, Atlanta, and Dallas, to maybe take champs or make it far at least. And they drop out without winning a series. So I'm pretty sure that that's since Black Ops 3, he hasn't won a series at champs. I don't even think he went that deep at Black Ops 3. He was on was he on Cloud9? No, that was on Aches. What the heck team was he on? H2K, I think he might have been on, maybe? Or maybe at the time at champs he was on Complexity. I can't remember, but I'm pretty sure he won a couple series at least. I don't think he went that deep. But it's scary to think about it. If he hasn't won a series at champs since BO3, that might be something you have to take into account when you're building your team, is if this guy's teams just crumble at champs, you might not want to touch him. But that's enough on a team that finished 7th/8th. But I did want to touch on them a lot because they were a super disappointing outcome of this weekend. And then 6th, a team that's kind of also on the disappointing spectrum, but you wouldn't have thought like a month ago that 6 would be a disappointing finish. You would have thought that had been an amazing finish for them. The Toronto Ultra. It feels like this should be a positive, like I said, that they finished 6th, because not too long ago, they were like 11th or dead last in the standings, and they look like a team that was just lost, making a million roster change every weekend. So it feels like this should be a positive that they were able to finish 6th, but it almost feels like a super disappointing negative to me. They were able to beat London in the first round, who's a very good team, obviously, considering they made top 4. And then they were able to take out Florida 3-1, who many people picked to win the tournament or to make the top 4. And then in the spot, the match for winners finals against Dallas, they had a 2-1 lead and they blew that. If they would have won that, they'd have been in winners finals against Faze and guaranteed top 3. And then they went on to lose to London for that top 4 spot. So like they went from beating London and beating Florida, 2 very good teams, to being up 2-1 against Empire. If they win that, they're in winners finals. They end up blowing that 2-1 lead. They got smoked in map 4 and 5, and then they go on to lose to London for top 4. So it feels like Toronto should be playing in the winners bracket at championship weekend, but instead they finished top 6. It feels like almost all weekend they were the better team than London, because, I mean, let's face it, when they beat London and then beat Florida, they looked pretty unstoppable. And then when they were up 2-1 on Empire, people were like, does Toronto have a chance to win champs? People thought they did. I just feel like they should be in top 4 over London, but obviously London was able to clutch up and beat them. But Toronto just looked so good early on in the weekend that it seems almost disappointing that they finished 6th, even though a couple months ago they would have been super happy to finish 6th. I honestly, like I said, think they could have been in winners finals. So from where they were in the beginning of the year, top 6 is good, but it feels so bad. I feel so bad for them that they couldn't make it further. It does feel, though, like with Cammy and Kleenex, they have something to build on, like franchise-type players, and Methods could even be like your franchise AR. So you've got a sub to build around in Kleenex. I don't think Bance is really somebody to build around, but you've got a sub in Kleenex to build around, a flex-type player in Cammy to build around, and then a main AR and Methods to build around. Toronto's kind of brewing something special, I think. And then in the other 5th/6th position, the other team that was just on the edge of making it to championship weekend, it's OGLA. What do we get from them? I actually did predict this placement as well. I thought they were going to finish right on the edge of making it to Champs Weekend, but they were going to fall a little bit short. I think I had them falling short to London, maybe? I can't really remember who I had them falling short to. it had to be London or Dallas because those are my teams that I had coming in losers to championship weekend. But Texas Kenny was unreal. TJ was much improved. Slasher was himself that you'd expect at champs, and the young guns played well. Although Draza did struggle a little bit compared to his normal that we've seen over the last few events. He had a .85, but they were able to beat LA Gorillas, who are just garbage, obviously. Then they were able to take out Minnesota in a relatively closely played series. And then they 3-0 Florida, dominate them. And then they're obviously round 11, 1v1 TJ versus Envoy away from a spot in top 4, which could have easily gone their way. Super impressive weekend for them. I honestly think if they keep TJ, Slasher, and Kenny going into a new Treyarch title, they could be a problem. Slasher's always a top 3 AR in every title. Kenny is a top sub in every title or flex. And then TJ's also obviously a top sub in any title. If they keep those 3 together for a Treyarch game, in a game that they all enjoy grinding, they could be a problem. They could be the best team in the game in the next title. So I'm super excited for their future. And now the top 4. Obviously, we can't really have too much of a full conclusion to take from them because they still have CoD to play, these teams. But first we'll start out with London. We're going to start with like London and Chicago since they're the 2 teams that are in the loser side of things. London was so impressive. I'm so proud of them. As you can tell from the previous videos, I've kind of been a London fan all year. I really like the players in their team. I predicted them to get top 4. I'm surprised they did. It was kind of more to make a bold prediction. I saw them as a team that could potentially make it, but I wanted to make my bracket a little different. And you know what? They proved me right for it. I'm glad they did. And I'm super proud of them, mostly because of the fact that they had the stupid circumstance where they probably were going to win that map for Hackney. They had like a 30-point lead, like 221.90-ish or something, and they had the rotations to the next hill, which is almost an impossible hill to break. So London was likely going to win that map 4 against Toronto and send it to a map 5. And who knows, they could have easily lost that map 5. Toronto was hot and is a super good search team. But normally London, as we've seen this entire year, and honestly like with Scraps teams in the past, usually if something crazy like that happens to them, that's super unfortunate and like is out of their control, they would crumble and they would just let it take control of their mental for the whole rest of the weekend, and their mental would be shattered, and they would just they would not be able to come back from that. They would just crumble and they would get eliminated instantly. But instead, they rallied back like we've never seen them really rally back before, to be honest. Stats-wise, Wuskin only had a 1.01, which is significantly lower than his usual. But Shawnee stepped up big time with a 1.01, which is significantly better than his usual, kind of proving that he belongs. And he honestly proved my ranking of him wrong. I had him in like the replaceable or decent category, I think. But let's not get carried away with one weekend. I had some people kind of talking to me on Twitter saying like he proved he was out of the replaceable tier, or like he definitely shouldn't be in that tier, which I agree. Obviously, after his performance this weekend, he had a great performance. He was in probably like the great category after the weekend. But let's be honest. I always did say he was a solid player, but he's always been a fill-in player. Last year he got dropped off Reciprocity. He always seems to get dropped off teams when there's any chance to pick up somebody else, because he's just like a filler type player. He's a very good player. He can be on a team that can finish top 4. He finished top 4 in Reciprocity last year, I believe, and now he's going to finish top 4 at Champs this year. He's always a player that you could win with. But going into this event, you can't say that he was anything more than like replaceable or decent, because he hasn't been that good this year. Obviously, he was amazing this weekend, but leading into this event, he hasn't been that good. And also, any European fans that are like, oh my God, Shawnee is so amazing. Yes, he was amazing this weekend, but you can't possibly tell me that he has ever been consistently better in his career than Rated or Jerd. I mean, Rated is one of the most storied European players of all time, and Jerd might be the most storied European player of all time, along with like Tommy, Mad Cat, guys like that. Even Bance with his one international win that he had on that team, that amazing Splice team. But obviously, like I said, come on now. Shawnee was amazing this weekend. I'm so happy for him. I love Shawnee as a player. I really like him. He kind of is a guy that he's like the type of player that I love, that just puts his head down, does the dirty work. He might drop a 0.8 when he's a talented enough player to drop a 1.0, but he might drop a 0.8 because he's doing all the dirty work for the team. So like I said, super proud of Shawnee. I love him as a player. I hope that he can continue, because it'll make the Chicago series super entertaining if Shawnee continues in that level. I'm also kind of happy for him because I think honestly he was probably poised to be dropped for like Jerd or Rated or something again next year in a new title, but he kind of proved that, hey, you know what, I kind of carried you guys in some searches. I was super clutch. Like, you can't drop me going into next year. So I'm happy for Shawnee, but once again, I think my rating of him was fair leading into Champs. Obviously after this, he's way above that tier, but leading into Champs, I think the rating was fair. And then speaking on the Huntsmen, next, the other team that's in losers, what a roller coaster of a weekend for them. They take out New York 3-2, super close map. Scump absolutely takes over in that map 5 versus New York. Then they lose a super close map 5 to Atlanta, and Prestinni played pretty awful in both series against New York and Atlanta, and they still could have beaten Atlanta. This is pretty scary for the remaining teams, to be honest, because when Prestinni played much better versus Optic, they looked like they could hit new levels. Scump didn't play as well in the early games against Optic, while Prestinni was stepping up. I think he was like the leading killer in like 2 of the maps or something. But overall, on the weekend, Scump was unreal. I mean, Arcitys and Formal were decent, but I know both of them can play much better. And then Envoy was honestly amazing. He was pretty damn good in the respawns, but he was amazing in search like he has been all year. He made so many key plays in search. Obviously won the 1v1 that sends him to this weekend, and he obviously held his own in respawn. But like I said, I think if Prestinni can hit that level that he was playing, he dropped like a 0.78 on the whole weekend. If he can hit like a 0.9 level and like kind of like the way he was playing against Optic, if Scump can keep his form, Envoy they don't have to actually get that much. Scump keeping his form is tough because he was at an unreal form, but if Envoy can keep his form, Prestinni can just step it up a tick, and then Arcitys and Formal can step it up a tick, which, I mean, you're asking Arcitys and Formal, 2 of the greatest players of all time, to step it up just a little bit, and Prestinni, another all-time great player, to step it up a little bit. They can all do that, so it could be scary for the rest of the teams, but honestly, a super impressive weekend from Chicago, and especially from Champ Scump. He always shows up at this time of year, proving that he wasn't washed for whatever. I mean, I can't believe anybody would say he's washed and want to get him out of the esport for what he does for it, but super proud of him to bounce back and kind of prove a lot of people that say he's washed wrong. And then next, the top 2 teams, we're going to kind of group them together because there isn't as much to talk about. Faze and Empire, they each only played 1 match. They both won 3-2. A lot less to talk about, obviously, because they only played the 1 match. I will say, though, Empire did show signs to me that they could win it all because they had great composure. A team like Toronto has kind of always played them tough and had their number a little bit, especially recently. They were down 2-1 to them, kind of in like a repeat situation, like, oh boy, are we going to lose to them again, or have a nice tight match with them again? And they were able to clutch up against a super hot Toronto team, come back from down 2-1, and they actually smoked them in map 4 and 5. I could easily see Dallas taking it all. I still think I'm going to stick with my prediction of Atlanta taking it all, but I would not be shocked at all if Dallas is able to beat Atlanta and that take it. They seem to be in top form. And then just like I said about the Huntsmen, if they could have a couple players tick it up, I'm super scared for the rest of the teams. I'm also scared about a form that Faze could hit if I'm a fan of London, Dallas, or Chicago. Major Maniac was honestly the guy that was going big mostly against Chicago. He had some crazy plays in that map 5, which hasn't been the case much of the year. Major Maniac's been a good player all year, but usually when somebody's taking over for Faze, it's a BZ, Celium, or Simp. One of those 3 players is just absolutely going off. So to me, what's scary for the rest of the teams is Priesta and Abizi were in form. They both had 1.18s. Obviously, Abizi's been in that form or better like all year, but Priesta, besides last event and now champs here or playoffs here, Priesta has been kind of struggling a little bit towards the middle of the year, but he seems to be in form now. And then Celium and Major Maniac were also around 1s. They seem to be in their top form. But Simp actually struggled a little bit in the series against Chicago. He had a 0.93, which obviously that's not horrible for most players, but if you know anything about Simp and that man, he's usually dropping a 1.2 minimum. So, I mean, if you look, Celium, Major Maniac, Priesta, and Abizi all seem to be in top form, and Simp seem to struggle a little bit. I highly, highly doubt that Simp struggles at the Final 4. I would be absolutely shocked if he doesn't. Even 0.93 is not that bad. It's pretty unlikely that all 4 people on your team are going to have over a 1, but I highly doubt Simp's gonna stay that low, and I wouldn't be shocked if he hops from a 0.9 to a 1.2. If he hits that form, I think it's going to be pretty impossible for anybody to beat Faze. I still think Atlanta is likely to win it all. Now we're going to quickly do an MVP segment. It's a little bit different to talk about an MVP segment here for this weekend because normally we have like a team that won the weekend, so they have to have an MVP, and then a team that finished like second, so they probably have the losing MVP. But first, we're going to get into the losing team MVP. To me, it had to be somebody from Toronto or OGLA because those are the teams that were one match and honestly, truly one map away from making it to the finals. I mean, Toronto was all the way up in like winners round 3 or 4, whatever that was, winners semifinal. And then OGLA made their run from all the way in losers round 1 all the way to that like losers round 4 or 5 or whatever. So those are the 2 teams that have to have the losing team MVP. On Toronto, you could argue like Cammy and Kleenex were obviously great, but they were at the form that we've seen them for the last couple events. So we've come to expect that out of them a little bit. They didn't play like crazy above that their normal output. So the losing team MVP is pretty clear to me. I honestly don't think you can make another argument for anybody else. It's Kenny. The dude dropped a 1.15 on the weekend, which is like 10 times better than he's done all year. Obviously not literally, because that means he would have been like horrible the whole year. But he dropped like 45 kills on a cave hardpoint and was just unreal all weekend. I was so damn impressed with him. I think he's clearly the MVP. He was like so much better than he's been all year, which was honestly probably what allowed Optic to move on past that first round. I'm so glad that they ended up moving on past that first round. Kenny got hit off in 2 of the maps. Obviously, Dashy stepped up and went huge in that map 5 with the sniper. But I'm so glad that OGLA was able to win that, because if LAG would have won that, they would have just got smoked in their next match, probably versus Minnesota. And then we would have had like Minnesota moving on, and that wouldn't have made for as entertaining of a match. And LAG would have been moved on. That wouldn't have made for as entertaining of matches. So I'm glad Optic moved on, because they were able to offer us. And they swept Florida to mess up the tournament, and they had maybe gave us the best series all year versus Chicago. That might be the best series in Modern Warfare that we'll ever see. I'm hoping that we see something better in Champs Weekend, because anything better than that would be absolutely insane. I don't know if it gets much better than that. But yeah, I also might be a little bit biased, because if you've been watching the channel for a while, listening to the podcast for a while, you know that Kenny is pretty much tied with Methods for me as my all-time favorite player. I just love that dude. He's the losing team MVP of the playoff weekend for me. Then the winning team MVP, I think, is also fairly obvious. I think, just to be fair, I don't think you can give MVP to anybody on Faze or Empire. There might be people that deserve it, but I'm not going to even put them in consideration for like a winning team MVP, simply because they only played 1 series. So it's kind of tough when teams like London played like, 5 series to make it here, 4 series to make it here, and then Chicago played like 3 or 4 series to make it here. I think it's kind of unfair to give the winning team MVP or whatever you want to call it to somebody that only played 1 series. So it's got to be between somebody on London and on Chicago for me. And to me, it's Scump. I don't think he's gotten a losing or winning team MVP all year, because he's been a solid player all year, but like people like Envoy or Arcitys have been standouts on his team. But the man had a 1.09 with a sub, which is pretty damn tough to do. And he had a 1.29 in search, which is just unreal KD, across as many maps as he did play in search. And then he also had, he had played at least 6 search maps, because he went 3 map 5s. Yeah. He also had like 12 kills map 5 against New York and took over that map. Then he also took over that map 5 against OGLA to qualify for champs with like 12 kills. He was vintage Scump, honestly, most of all the weekend. He was pretty much going off every map, kind of like we used to see in like Black Ops 3 and AW and Black Ops 2. Those games, we used to see him go off like literally every map to help carry the team. It's kind of what we saw this weekend. He wasn't carrying the team like he would way back in the day. He had a lot more help this time, but he was going off. And also, when you're comparing it to his play the rest of the year, it was a huge uptick, kind of like I said with Kenny. Scump has been good all year, but he hasn't been superstar Scump, and this weekend he was superstar Scump. It was his biggest jump, and I think it was honestly a bigger jump than anyone on his team compared to their normal play or on London. The only argument that you can make that I would say is a legit one for another winning team MVP would be from the London team, and it'd be Shawnee. Shawnee is usually around a 0.8, 0.9, and he was at a 1 this weekend. He made huge improvements on what his typical output was, and just like Scump, he was making huge plays. He had another vintage 1v2 in construction, which is like Shawnee's playground is like construction, and he was super good all weekend. So like I said, I'm giving Shawnee his props. I think that he's the only other argument you can make for like a winning team MVP. And then lastly, we're going to get into like maybe 2 or 3 quick hot takes in the hot take section. I don't want to go too long, because I think this pod is already pretty long. It's going to get super long. We had a lot to talk about from this weekend and some news. So we're going to get into maybe like a quick 2-3 hot takes, and then kind of wrap up the video. So the first one I want to talk about is there are definitely some mixed feelings I have about this franchise league. I really miss open events. But one of the things that I think is good about the league is the fact that we can start to kind of look at guys like franchise guys. Before this year, we had like the only franchise players that were like really franchise players were like Scump and Formal and guys that have been on Optic, because most organizations, maybe that like the players would stick together, but most organizations, I guess the only other team that really had like franchise guys was like Zoom Unattached, were on Faze for like 4 years. But like most organizations didn't have franchise players because organizations would come in and out of the league. Teams would flip flop so much. The only teams that really stayed intact for so long was like the Optic Dynasty stayed around forever, and then that Faze team and mainly Zoom Unattached stayed around forever. Those were like the only franchise players we had because everybody else was just jumping org to org all the time. And then I guess maybe that NV team too with Cap, Apathy, John, and Slasher. They stayed together for like 2 years. But you know what I mean. Most teams they were just jumping around, or most players jumped around from org to org. But now it's kind of cool that we can look at players like we can in sports as like franchise guys. Like in the NBA, when somebody drafts like my team, like Giannis, he's like a franchise player. Or LeBron, if you get him on your team, he's your franchise player. They're not hopping from team to team every year like they would in CoD, or maybe multiple teams a year. Now we can kind of establish some players as franchise guys in our eyes, and in my opinion, some people did that this weekend. Obviously, you've got your guys like Kenny, Slasher, and TJ who really showed that, you know, despite the shaky year they've had, they're franchise guys for OGLA, as if we didn't already know that. Then even like a guy like Vivid, possibly on LAG, maybe not as much this weekend he established himself as a franchise guy, but throughout the year, he kind of made himself maybe as like a player that LAG is going to keep and build around. And then 3 guys on Florida, Awakening, Fero, Skies. Once again, maybe not this weekend they didn't establish that, but throughout the year, Awakening, Fero, and Skies kind of prove that, you know, if we keep Awakening as a flex, Fero as a sub, and then like Skies as our main AR, we're probably going to be pretty good for a long time. Like I said, more so over the course of the year, they prove this rather than this weekend. Envoy for Chicago. Obviously, like guys like Formal and Scump are probably going to stay on Chicago until they retire because of the brand they've established within that team. But Envoy, once again, this weekend kind of proved like, hey, I'm a guy that should be like looked at once Formal and Scump are gone. I'm kind of a guy that should be a franchise player for this team. And then Illey and shottzyy for Dallas. They kind of prove that they're franchise players. There's obviously other guys that I'm probably missing, but guys like Simp and Abizi, we obviously knew before this year they were franchise guys. So, I mean, I'm obviously leaving out guys like that we obviously knew before this, but it's kind of cool to like go into next year knowing like Octane's like the man in Seattle, Formal, Scump, Envoy, Arcitys, those are like the guys in Chicago. Illey and shottzyy are kind of like the guys in Dallas. Awakening, Fero, and Skies are the franchise players in Florida. Even Vivid's like a franchise player in LAG. I don't know if Paris is going to keep anybody, maybe like Kismet or something. It's kind of cool to know like going into each year, there's going to be like that staple player on a certain franchise to keep things more consistent. And I think it'll keep fan bases in place in more areas rather than having them jump from org to org like they did in the old days. So it's so cool to be able to talk about this rather than guys hopping from org to org. So yeah, I think that's honestly a cool positive about the franchise league as much as we like to bash it in other ways. And then one other take I wanted to offer, probably the last one, is the fact that this playoffs was actually a pretty fun format. I do really hope that we can expand to 16 teams maybe this year or the next year and get back to like that 16-team format we had last year when the events weren't open. Obviously, Champs was 32. I wish we could do open events, but they're not going to allow amateur teams in a franchise league at the odd chance that one would win, and then all the teams that paid all the money to get in would be pretty pissed at that. So yeah, I really hope we do have an expansion. This playoffs was a fun format, but I would love the old format back of like the 16-team kind of open tournaments. So I hope we can get that format back next year if there is an expansion. But I haven't heard anything about that. I'm getting a little worried. That's honestly all I wanted to offer on takes, as this podcast is already fairly long. I don't want to make it too long on you guys. But yeah, we're going to wrap it up now. I wanted to thank you guys so much for the support throughout this season. The support's been unreal. I can't believe we're over 100 subs. I can't believe the amount of views we get a month, the watch time and everything. It's absolutely insane. So thank you guys so much for tuning in all season. We're going to try to keep producing the podcast. Obviously, we'll do one more for the reaction for the Champs Final Four weekend. We're going to try to keep producing, and I might add a guest here and there. Coming up soon in the off season, so we're gonna kind of try to keep pumping it out with like roster news videos and stuff, and maybe some other type of videos. Gonna try to keep pumping out the content throughout the off season. Thank you so much for tuning into this pod. Be sure to sub if you are new and you enjoy the videos. Like if you enjoyed this one. The likes really help out the channel a lot. And then most importantly, comment some of your thoughts down below. And be sure to follow on Twitter. The link is in the description. But yeah, comment down below. You know, that's my favorite part of the videos. Offer some of your thoughts or ask some questions or something about what I thought about the weekend. I hope you have fun watching the Final Four this weekend. I look forward to making a reaction pod to that when it's all said and done. So thank you guys so much for tuning in. Have fun watching the Final Four. I know I will. And I will see you guys in the next one. Thank you so much for watching.